Reflecting back on the 1980s means remembering the decade for all the things that made it special. Unique fashion, flamboyant hairstyles, and an overall vibrance before a shift to the more grungy and edgy feel of the 1990s. Honing in on the action figure market, the decade began with Star Wars standing tall and ended with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles seemingly being everywhere. Yet, the majority of the decade in this subgenre was defined by the big three boys' targeted toys, namely Masters of the Universe, G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, and the Transformers. While none of these three would be as popular by the end of the 80s as they had been in the middle of the decade, it's still important to see the direction taken by this aspect of toy history by 1989. He-Man would see a refresh of their toy line in 1989 as they made the attempt to ramp up again with the eventual New Adventures of He-Man cartoon of the early 1990s. G.I. Joe was still relatively strong, albeit had lost some momentum compared to their peak years. And the Transformers would continue to introduce new gimmicks as they continued to deviate further from the original offerings that most people generally associate this toy line with. When looking at their overall range of product in 1989, it's clear they still had a strong foothold in Japanese markets and still had some life as a brand on store shelves in the Western world. But the question could be asked whether or not characters like Starsaber, Deathsaurus, and their associated cast of robots are worthy of a similar iconic status compared to the Autobots and Decepticons that preceded them. That's what we're here to talk about today, so stay tuned because this is the history of the Transformers in the year of 1989. Let's begin.
Transformers, the most incredible micros of all.
Like the previous year's 1988 Transformers lineup, the 1989 series featured a bit of a divergent path, whereby some items were only sold in the Western world, with others exclusive to Japanese markets, yet with some amount still crossing over into both sales regions. This gives the Transformers something of a splintered legacy during this period of its existence. Thus, over the many years, fans would come to learn of important characters that they did not see during their childhood, further adding to their curiosity about the Generation 1 selection. Yes, 1989 as a whole would close out the decade before the change to the aforementioned grittier, more rebellious, albeit equally memorable decade of the 1990s. But the final year of the glamorous 80s wasn't without its own key additions in the world of entertainment and pop culture, a world that the Transformers had naturally found itself embedded in since 1984. There was always something to listen to on the radio if you weren't in front of your TV screen, with hits both from artists in their prime years as well as long-term artists who still had something left to give, thus adding to their already legendary careers. The box office this year was largely about catching sequels to already existing popular film series, thus making each trip to the big screen memorable. And in some cases, we'd get a refresh of an existing franchise that would become its own timeless classic. The small screen this year had its share of television debuts as well, ranging across several genres, and that of course included the Saturday morning cartoon lineup. A lineup that the Transformers was no longer part of in Western markets, unless of course you were catching reruns. Elsewhere in household entertainment, Nintendo's Game Boy made its mark as a handheld device this year, and Sega had imported its Mega Drive console from overseas markets, calling it the Sega Genesis when brought into North America. Closer to the world of Japanese anime, this was also the first year of the Dragon Ball Z series, carrying on from the previous Dragon Ball show. And when it came to robot-themed animation, Gundam would release its 0080 War in the Pocket series. These were of course in the same Japanese market as the Transformers Victory series, which was the 6th season of the Transformers. And like the Master Force cartoon before it, it had more of that Japanese anime feel rather than being more stylized like an American Saturday morning cartoon. To quickly summarize, if you're following the North American cartoon releases, you'll be watching the first 3 seasons of the cartoon, including the 1986 movie, then wrap up your viewing experience with the shorter, abbreviated 4th Transformers season titled Transformers: The Rebirth. If you're following the Japanese cartoon series, you'll still watch the first 3 seasons of the cartoon including the animated movie, but the Rebirth series becomes out of continuity. Instead, you get 3 additional full-length follow-up seasons, which includes the Headmaster series as the 4th season, Super Godmaster Force as the 5th season, and Transformers Victory as the 6th final full-length Transformers season in the Japanese animated timeline, which includes 32 unique episodes as well as various clip shows. That'll take you up to 1989, and then there's a single 1990 episode titled Transformers Zone. That said, it's the 1989 Victory series that naturally goes hand in hand with the 89 cast of characters in the toy line. Looking at the figures that were released in Japan, the best place to start is with the Supreme Commander of the Autobot 1989 lineup, namely Starsaber. As with prior Japanese stories, the Autobots were known as the Cybertrons in Japan. One new gimmick in Japan this year was the Brainmaster concept, and Starsaber was an example of this. The smaller robot component contains the Brainmaster itself, and that assembly can then turn into the chest of the larger robot form. He also has various other transformations, such as a base mode, as well as a flight mode. This flight mode can consist of just the smaller front section on its own, or can be merged with his larger body, which is called the V-Star, for a more grandiose shuttle mode. If you're looking to start your Transformers Victory collection, the ultra-powerful Starsaber would be a good option. His companion piece was known as Victory Leo. Now, in the '89 cartoon, Victory Leo was actually the new form of Ginrai, who had died in battle when he showed up to help the Autobots in this season of the cartoon. He was reformatted by Perceptor, Minerva, and a very much alive Wheeljack, and turned into Victory Leo. Now, while in essence Ginrai and Victory Leo are the same, Victory Leo is a more ferocious, unpredictable character with a natural animalistic nature. His various modes effectively make him a triple changer, and do note that he and Starsaber could be purchased separately back in 1989 or be bought together in this amazing gift set box. Ultimately though, the most impressive merged form for the two is the combination of them into this amazing, gigantic robot known as Victory Saber. You can have a look at Victory Saber's imposing size right here and see how he scales even compared to other large Transformers from previous years. Victory Saber's also got a combined flight mode to merge both Starsaber and Victory Leo in this form, and overall this entire offering is probably the most impressive of the 1989 Transformers lineup. As a side note, Starsaber was also sold as part of the Transform Jr. lineup of toys. The Combiner teams took a bit of a different approach this year, and we'll begin with the Autobot ones. Road Caesar came in both a gift set, as shown here, and the components could also be bought separately in individual boxes. As you can see, Road Caesar consists of 3 bots rather than the usual 5 or 6, as each bot in toy form is larger than your usual Combiner piece. All 3 have a car mode and a Brainmaster partner, so much like what was shown with Starsaber, you get the same Brainmaster gimmick feature here again. The 3 bots consist of Blacker, Laster, as well as Braver, and all 3 come with individual swords as well. They combine to form the aforementioned Road Caesar, so in this case you have both the Brainmaster gimmick as well as the Combiner ability here. Note that the sword can combine into a merged form as well, and overall, Road Caesar was a character featured heavily in the Victory cartoon series. The other Autobot Combiner shown heavily in the Victory cartoon was Landcross, and he consisted of the 6 individual Multi-Force bots. The Multi-Force bots were sold in 3 smaller boxes, each containing 2 figures, but were also sold as a gift set that contained all 6 bots. There are various combinations you can try when you pair up the individual bots, but some of the more commonly intended transformation pair-ups are shown here. Individually, and in no particular order, the 6 bots consist of Wing, Waver, Dash, Tacker, as well as Mac and Tackle. Forming them up into the Combiner Landcross is the main desired feature for many collectors with this item, especially if you already have Road Caesar and the other Combiners for him to be shown with. And similar to Road Caesar's weapons option, the guns can combine to form a single, larger weapon for Landcross to use in battle. Revisiting the 6-changer feature from prior years, here's the Autobot Great Shot, who is a redeco and a slight retool of the 1987 Decepticon 6-Shot. and like previous Transformers 6 changers, all the different forms give Greatshot a ton of play value, and switching him from one state to another is an activity in of itself. The Victory cartoon portrayed him as having a rivalry and history with some of the Decepticons like Blue Bacchus, Black Shadow, and Guy-Hawk, and Greatshot's role expanded when he was asked to become one of the Autobot commanders after God Ginrai fell in battle. Galaxy Shuttle is yet another character featured in the Victory cartoon series, serving as a transport of sorts for his fellow bots, and as his name implies, his alternate mode is literally a space shuttle. He's able to open up and hold smaller robots inside, such as Micromasters, and he's compatible with the Micromaster Countdown base to replace the rocket there and situate himself in a takeoff position. And speaking of Countdown, the big feature of 1989 was the addition of the Micromasters, at least for the US market. The Micromasters themselves would play a bigger role in Japanese markets when Takara would release them there in 1990. Thus, while there'll be some discussion here about the Japanese Micromaster releases, the discussion here will skew a little bit towards the American names and releases. Countdown is the name of the small Micromaster that comes with this set, and he transforms into a lunar-style rover of sorts. He's an important part of the 2000s era Dreamwave Micromasters comic, and is often the first Micromaster that many fans associate with when collecting this subline of characters. Countdown was called Moon Radar in Japan, and wouldn't show up in animation form until the 1990 Transformers Zone single episode, where he'd show up along with several other Micromasters that we'll be talking about in this video. That said, the rocket base on its own was featured in the '89 Victory cartoon series. The rocket base has both a more spread out transformation mode as well as the standard gantry form that can either hold the rocket that came with the set, or as mentioned earlier, it can be used to launch Galaxy Shuttle as well. This entire offering is the largest of the 1989 Micromaster range. The idea for the Micromasters is that they are more fuel-efficient versions of their larger counterparts. Looking at the teams themselves, the Rescue Patrol is particularly significant as they appeared in the Victory cartoon series, alternating between being serious as well as being lighthearted as a group. Fix-It is the ambulance, going by the name of Peepo in Japan. Red Hot here is also known as Fire in Japan and is naturally a fire engine. For aquatic missions, here's Sea-Watch, known as Boater in Japan, and most notably Stakeout, who goes by the name of Holy in Japan. Holy is good friends and is often seen with the Victory cartoon's main human protagonist, named Jan. Though, as Jan had become an orphan, he also has something of a father-son type of a relationship with Star Saber. The Victory cartoon's inclusion of the Rescue Patrol is why it made sense for some of them to be included as a stretch goal tier unlock as part of the more modern HasLab Victory Saber campaign. The Race Car Patrol is another set produced this year, consisting of Road Handler, Freewheeler, Tailspin, and Swindler. And like many of the Micromasters produced in 1989, the Race Car Patrol had a bit of screen time during the 1990 Zone Special episode. The Off-Road Patrol was a set of 4, including Powertrain, Tote, High Jump, and Mudslinger, and they were more rugged style vehicles compared to that of the sleek-looking Race Car set. I'll point out that the Off-Road Patrol, Race Car Patrol, and the Decepticon Airstrike Patrol may have come out at the end of 1988, hence why their packaging colors look more like that of the toys from 1988, rather than matching the silver 1989 packaging common to the US releases at the time. However, they're part of the official 1989 catalog and not the 1988 one, and collectors generally associate the Micromasters as being the new big gimmick of 1989. Actual release dates can always be a bit variable, so we'll go ahead and baseline these releases as part of the '89 set along with the other Micromasters. The Autobot Micromaster quartets also included a crew known as the Battle Patrol Group, and this military-themed set was comprised of Big Shot, Flak, Sidetrack, and Sunrunner. This was one of the sets that got various recolors during the early 90s in Japan. The Micromasters also had a pair of transports this year, and we can start with the truck cab named Overload. Much like the greatest Autobot ever, Optimus Prime, he came with a trailer that he could pull, though that trailer could also transform into a jet as an alternate mode. The other Autobot Micromaster transport had the somewhat humorous name of Erector, and he was a construction engineer whose trailer attachment is a crane that can also turn into a battle station. There were also a couple of Micromasters this year that were actually advertised as battle stations, such as Hot House, who comes with a transformable fire station, and the other Autobot battle station was Ironworks, the Micromaster of which was a recolor of the Off-Road Patrol's powertrain, and his construction station could switch between its standard mode and its communications tower mode. And we've got a somewhat large Micromaster offering with Ground Shaker. He's a field commander whose armored ATV transforms into a fold-out battle station, and his 1990 Japanese release had the same battle station, albeit with different decals, though that release came with a Micromaster known as Gunrunner instead. There were several Pretenders that were released in Western markets that never made it to Japan. These 1989 Pretenders were smaller than their 1988 counterparts, and here's Doubleheader, who literally comes with 2 heads and, like the 1988 Pretenders, comes with a transformable inner robot within the shell. There's also Longtooth, an undersea warrior with his animalistic looking outer shell, and then Pincher, a master of chemicals whose inner robot turns into a scorpion. Then there's the pair of Autobot Mega Pretenders, where both the inner robot and outer shell were transformable, unlike the standard Pretenders. The inner robot and shell could also have their own combined mode together, and this year consisted of 2 good guy offerings, namely Crossblades and then Vroom. The Pretender concept still took it one step further in this year with the Ultra Pretenders, whereby you'd get a transformable Pretender shell with a transformable inner robot, but both could be hidden within an even larger external shell, basically being a 3-in-1 offering. The Autobot release was known as Skyhammer. The final Pretender's sub-gimmick was the Pretender Classics, who made use of existing characters from bygone years.
Jazz, Bumblebee, you're back! And me, Grimlock!
Yes, characters from 1984 such as Jazz were back, as were Bumblebee and 1985's Grimlock. This time, they all formed the inner robots for use within the external Pretender shells. Note that the inner robots were also sold on their own without the shells as Kmart exclusives back in the day. And additionally, the 1989 Japanese Hero set also featured the inner robots in their own unique packaging. Take note of the addition of Starscream in this set and his inclusion in the Pretender Classics lineup. They're mostly unchanged from their US releases, save for a couple of them having differing paint or sticker applications. Like some of the other Pretenders shown here, the Pretender Classics did have a role to play during the old Marvel Comics run. Ultimately, there's a lot that can be said about all these figures, and there's even further variant releases, such as the Micromaster sets being included with the later Micro trailers, even as late as 1991 in Japan as one example. But the plan here is to give you all a good idea of the Autobot offerings that began in 1989. That covers the heroic side, but let's have a look at who the Decepticons added into their lineup this year as well. We may as well start with Starsaber's rival in the Victory cartoon series, namely Deathsaurus, who is also known as the Emperor of Destruction for the Decepticon or Destron ranks if you prefer. For gimmicks in Japan this year, he's part of the oddly named Breast Force Warriors and thus comes with 2 transformable chest components known as Eagle Breast as well as Tiger Breast. He was something of a hands-off leader early in the Victory cartoon, preferring to let his soldiers do the field work, though he does come face to face with Starsaber in a final battle to close out the series. His alternate mode is that of a dragon-type monster, similar to the old-school Japanese kaiju monsters, and his tail can be transformed into a shield that can rest on the side of one of his arms. You will notice that Deathsaurus, Starsaber, and other figures in this range are larger toys than the leader characters of the past, which makes sense as many of the core characters in the 1989 Victory cartoon series were combiner-sized anyway. In any case, Deathsaurus is among the many Holy Grail toys you'll find amongst the Japanese-only releases of 1989. Amongst the other Breast Force members released for the Japanese line is the grouping of 6 that form the combiner called Liokaiser. The 6 characters consist of Hellbat, Guy-Hawk, Jaguar, Killbison, Drillhorn, as well as the leader, Leozak. Leozak also serves as Deathsaurus' second-in-command and is one of the more significant characters in the Victory series. This group in the cartoon is also briefly joined by another Breast Force member named Death Cobra, but this does not last as Death Cobra is killed off pretty quickly. Each of these Breast Force figures have chest-based transformers, much like Deathsaurus, albeit theirs are scaled to the size of the smaller bots. Merging to form up into Liokaiser, it's a fun combiner to own if you can get your hands on one, and is quite key if you happen to watch and enjoy the Victory cartoon. The other Japanese combiner released this year was comprised of the Dino Force sub-team who combined to form Dino King. They're led by Goryu, and the other members of the team include Gairyu, Doryu, Kakuryu, Rairyu, and Yokoryu. Hopefully I didn't botch any of those names. The individual bots also have dinosaur pretender shells, so they include both the pretender and combiner gimmick with this offer. Of note, they are often found bickering with one another and often used for comic relief in the cartoon. The Japanese releases also had their own Mega Pretenders with Blue Bacchus and Black Shadow. The pair formed a subgroup known as the Crossformers and had a small role to play in the Victory cartoon series where they were hired by Breast Force to steal a planet's energon. They're yet another hard to find set of items in the collector's market. Switching to the Decepticon Micromasters, Skystalker in many ways is the Decepticons' answer to the Autobots' Countdown. Like Countdown, the shuttle itself appeared in the Victory cartoon series and was known as the Thunder Arrow in Japan, though the Micromaster Skystalker himself only ever appeared in the commercial, at least animation-wise. The set was a retail release in the US, albeit sold as a mail-away in Japan, and it can unfold from its shuttle mode into its base mode. The Skystalker Micromaster does appear in various runs of the comic books over the years as well. Then there's Skyhopper, the aerial assault commander, and his helicopter, which would be the second largest Decepticon Micromaster offering in this year. And like the other Micromaster sets, it could unfold into its base mode. The copter was recolored into a white version known as the Sky Hyper in Japan, and it came with a different Micromaster named Deadwheeler. Like the Autobots, the Decepticons had their own Micromaster transports as well. Here you have Flat Top, with both an aircraft carrier mode that can turn into a jet mode, as well as Rough Stuff, who had both a truck transport mode, which could also turn into a jet mode. And the Decepticon battle stations here included Airwave, who was an airbase equipped with some anti-aircraft missiles, as well as Grease Pit, a fuel depot that turns into a towering battle mode. And one great play feature of the Micromaster sets that we've been talking about here is that their ramps are capable of connecting to one another, giving you the ability to build your own Micromaster city. And such ramps were good for both the Micromaster Autobot cars as well as this Decepticon Sports Car Patrol 4-pack. This set consisted of Blackjack, Roadhugger, Hyperdrive, and Detour. These four would see a recolor in Japanese markets during 1990, but done up as an Autobot faction instead. The Decepticons also had a flight-based team known as the Airstrike Patrol, consisting of Whisper, Tailwind, Stormcloud, and Night Flight. It was cool to see the Decepticons return back to basics with a subgrouping of jets, much like they did originally in 1984 with Starscream and the original set of Seekers. And as mentioned earlier, Starscream did join the Pretender lineup this year amongst the other group of returning classics. It was interesting seeing him and the other older characters with their own Pretender shells, and overall, it was a good idea to remarket existing characters with an updated gimmick. For the more standard style US release Pretenders, you had a true terror from the seas with Octopunch, and he was joined by an enforcer or a brutish tough guy of sorts here with Stranglehold. Then perhaps one of the more significant Pretenders released here in 1989 was the samurai-themed Bludgeon. Due to author Simon Furman's usage of him in the original Transformers Marvel comic run, Bludgeon became well known in fan circles and thus commands a high price compared to other Pretenders. He'd continue to be used throughout the comic book pages as the years went on, including the run by IDW Comics in the 2000s. Another who Simon Furman would make famous during the original Marvel run was Thunderwing. This was in particular during the Matrix Quest storyline during the latter part of that first Marvel run. Thunderwing is among the Mega Pretenders whose shell is transformable and combinable with his inner robot. He'd be another who'd resurface for the IDW Comics run from the 2000s and onwards. Additionally, the Ultra Pretenders representative on the Decepticon side this year was the character known as Roadblock, who naturally takes the same name as the famous G.I. Joe character a few years prior. Now, the last mainline subgroup that we'll be talking about today is the Monster Pretenders, consisting of 6 small combiner pieces, all with unique Pretender shells. In no particular order, we've got Icepick, Bristleback, Scowl, Wildfly, Slog, and Birdbrain. Their combined form uses the same tooling as Dino King, albeit with different external Pretender shells for the separate bots. Both Monstructor and Dino King are smaller combiners than their other combining counterparts, at least in toy form, albeit that doesn't necessarily translate to the various forms of fiction in which they appear. Monstructor notably appeared in the IDW comics continuity, where he was the first combiner ever made and was driven to levels of grotesque insanity and had a notable battle with Omega Supreme during the Optimus Prime Spotlight issue. While the 1989 set of Autobots and Decepticons would take us to the end of this great decade of action figure history, the Transformers would continue to have life perpetually thereafter. Yes, the Generation 1 line would end by 1990 in the US, albeit still continue internationally for a couple more years with various market-specific releases. We'd then see new directions taken by the brand, not the least of which are the releases of Generation 2 toys and the further evolution of the line with both Beast Wars and Beast Machines. And that's not even taking into account the new reimaginings of our favorite characters or the various modern lines revisiting our G1 favorites, or the slew of live-action films that would help bridge the gap from one generation to another, forever keeping the Transformers relevant on an ongoing basis in popular culture. In the end, the timeless element and groundbreaking play pattern of transformable robots mixed with iconic, likable characters makes for a never-ending, winning formula when it comes to marketing. And the fact that the Transformers can reach both adult-aged audiences as well as children of all ages is a result of Hasbro and Takara having developed something evergreen for us to continue appreciating. The Transformers brought fans together, whether we would play with our toys and act out the scenes we saw in various forms of fiction, or had us all conglomerate together to watch the fierce Cybertronian battles on various screens across the globe. It's a toy line and a media franchise that's a true fixture of the world that we live in. And if you happen to like this video, don't go anywhere just yet. I'm gonna put another History of the Transformers video that you can click on right over here, or for a look at an altogether different toy franchise, you can click on this video right over here. And with that, let's transform and roll out into the next video. Thanks for watching, and take care.